Good morning and welcome to the March 27th, 2017 meeting of the DNA Subcommittee. I'm Dwight Adams, the chair. Also present are Drs. Buell, Beaver, Eastman, Kidd, and Sozer, so we have a quorum. Our first order of business is to review and approve the meeting agenda. You've received a draft copy of today's agenda. Before we vote on that agenda, I'd like to propose one slight change. I would like to consider in December, the Commission on Forensic Science received a request to approve the familial DNA searching in New York State. In response to that request, the Commission solicited public comment, held a special joint meeting with the DNA Subcommittee to hear from the public on familial searching. We had that meeting in February on the 10th this year. At the conclusion, the Commission voted that the subcommittee should consider whether or not the New York State should employ familial searching, and if we felt it should, under what conditions. So I would like to make a motion that the agenda be approved with one exception, moving the familial searching right after the approval of the minutes. And I'm going to make that a motion.
So moved. Seconded.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. You've received a draft copy of the minutes from the November 4th, 2016 meeting. Are there any questions or comments regarding those minutes?
There was a period missing on paragraph 3 on page 4.
Page 4, paragraph 3, a period missing. We'll get
After
that
crime
included.
lab.
With that one change, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? You've also received a draft copy of the minutes from the special joint meeting of the Commission on Forensic Science and the DNA Subcommittee. That meeting was held on February 10th, 2017. Are there any questions or comments regarding those? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I approve. A second. Make a motion.
Got a motion? Do I have
I
a
second
second?
it.
We have a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? None. Okay, moving then to our adjusted agenda item, we'll begin with familial searching. As I mentioned on that February 10th meeting, members of the subcommittee were there to review that issue. Commissioner Green asked the subcommittee, and I have this in quotes, to consider whether or not New York State should employ familial searching, and if the subcommittee does in fact recommend that familial searching be used, under what conditions. Individually, members of this subcommittee have expressed their support of the concept and a desire to create a policy, working individually and in small groups of 2 or 3, and assisted by the staff from the Office of Forensic Services. A draft policy has been created, and we're now going to go in to discuss that draft policy. In your binders, you have several documents related to this issue. As I mentioned, you have the policy, the draft policy. There are also documents related to that policy concerning sections 6192.1 and 6192.3 of Title IX of New York Codes rules and regulations, and the DNA Data Bank implementation plan. If we do approve a policy for familial searching in New York State, the regulations and the implementation plan would also have to be amended accordingly. And these documents reflect that policy that you put forward in draft form. As we discuss and consider the changes to the draft policy this morning, we must also make appropriate and corresponding changes to the regulations and to the implementation plan. With that as a background, I would like to start any discussions that you would like to have and move forward as we consider this draft policy and adopting this draft policy if appropriate. Dr. Bieber.
Dr. Adams and members of the DNA subcommittee, I find this draft policy to be very well written and well considered. And I have a couple, maybe a half a dozen or more small wording changes that I think are important. And I'm wondering what the proper time and place is to recommend them.
I think now is the proper time and place, and we can go through them. I too have a few suggested changes, and we can discuss those as a group since we have the quorum.
Okay. If it please the group, then I would start with the first page. These are unnumbered, but I will go down to about the 5th line. Oh, I see. It is page 35. Sorry. The sentence beginning with familial searching. Can you find that about the 4th line down?
Mhm.
Yes.
Familial searching is a targeted evaluation of the DNA profiles or of the convicted offender profiles. It's not an evaluation of the offenders. It's an evaluation of DNA profiles.
Mhm.
So I would like to recommend that change. Couple lines down, kinship statistics. The word statistic is not quite correct. It's really a kinship calculation.
I had the same
Mhm.
concern with that word. I chose index or indices, and I'm open to your suggestion.
Well, it's based on a calculation of a kinship index. That's technically what's done. Amanda?
I would say, calculation.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with the wording. The result of the calculation is a
Statistic.
statistic.
Well, a statistic, in my view, is a computation based on a sample of something, and this is not what we're doing. We're looking at real data and making a computation of that instant alleged kin relationship. We're not sampling populations and making an estimate based on that sample. We're looking at a particular pair of samples in turn, one against the other, against the other, against the other. So that's what got my editorial pen out. I don't know that we need to get bogged down, but technically
No.
we're making a calculation.
Right, but you're looking at the results of the calculation.
So you could say, which generate a list of candidate, I was gonna say profiles, of candidate profiles based on a kinship calculation or comparison,
Plural, because it's profiles.
yes.
So I take it no one liked my idea of indices.
I'm happy with that.
Dr. Bieber?
Doesn't say how they're exactly calculated, but
So replace
Okay.
kinship statistics with an index,
Kinship
kinship.
indices.
indices.
I could go with that.
I can, if, yes.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Okay.
So what was the final verdict?
We're going to replace the word statistics with the word indices.
So
And
can I
then-
just read back that sentence?
Yes.
So familial searching is a target evaluation of the offender's DNA profiles in the New York State Data Bank, which generate a list of candidate profiles based on kinship indices to indicate potentially.
Um,
Potential.
To indicate,
Yes, and then the rest of the
Yes,
sentence. Okay.
but there was a change back on the word offenders,
It's, so I added offenders' DNA profiles.
okay?
Yeah.
One comment I would just have on the kinship statistics versus kinship indices. This does track in other places within the regulation and the implementation plan. To me, it seems like it would be logical to change it word for word, like a fine change. Just want to make sure you guys are okay with that.
Yes.
and the rest of that sentence needs a little tweaking, I must say, to indicate potential biologically related individuals. You're really indicating biologically related individuals to one or more sources of crime scene evidence. I think to be absolutely clear about what's happening. We're not looking for kin within the DNA data bank, but like
What are you searching?
kin in the
Yeah,
bank
yeah.
to that or those who left crime scene evidence. Agreed?
Brian, how does that impact the other parts of the document?
I think I would take out crime scene and just basically say evidence. If you want to look, I think throughout here it talks
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
evidence, so
Yeah,
just
that
if
would
you
be
took
good.
it out.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
And back at the beginning, if you leave the word offenders, DNA profiles, there needs to be an apostrophe after the S.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's possessing.
Or just say
Could someone
target.
read the sentence back?
Do you want me to read it? Familial searching is a targeted evaluation of the offender's DNA profiles in the New York State Data Bank, which generate a list of candidate profiles based on kinship indices to indicate potential biologically related individuals to one or more sources of evidence.
Yeah.
While we're on that paragraph, I would recommend changing the very last sentence in that paragraph, the word conditions to requirements. Before we go on to page 2 or beyond, we just need to remove a couple of ands at the very bottom, under 2A1 and 2A2. At the end, remove those ands.
I'm just gonna jump back, wait a second. Conditions, does that, just for the rest of the policy, does that make a difference?
So we'll change
replacing-
that throughout if there's any other places that, so we'll make sure there's conforming changes to all of these changes throughout, if we don't catch them as we go through.
Okay, Dr. Bieber?
The next comments I have are on the bottom of page 36.
Can we stay with 35?
Of course.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Under 1B, there's 2 requirements for investigating police agencies. I just wanted to float another idea with this, that the police agency have the resources are available at the police agency DA office to perform the required background investigation. I just want to throw that out there because there's a fair amount of work that will be done by the laboratory. And you want to make sure that somebody's coming to you and they say, hey, we've got money for overtime, we've got money to do this, to make this truly a worthwhile event. So I was just looking out for the laboratory here a bit.
I guess my concern is it's almost a budgetary request. Is that the purview of the subcommittee?
There's another place within the policy that might address that concern, which is ultimately, and maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves in reviewing this, but I know you've all looked at this, that once the application is submitted and both the case and the sample requirements, are justified,
Right.
it's still signed off on by the executive within DCJS, who's gonna look and see, and ultimately, if they have not done their homework, it's not gonna get to move forward.
Mhm.
So I guess the concern I would have from a policy perspective is, as Dr. Adams had suggested, that you're essentially putting budgetary constrictions in front as opposed to on the back end saying, listen, if you haven't done it, we're gonna send you back before the lab does one iota of work.
Yeah, I guess my feeling was that the lab goes through and profiles 100 people or something, which takes time and effort and money, and they give this list to the police officers. And they need to know that there's a number of people that they have to go and do some background investigation on. And for a small PD that doesn't have the resources to do this, they're gonna have to work with some other organization to pull it all together. And if that's gonna be covered somewhere in here, that's fine. It's just, I know it'd be, if I were back running the lab and somebody came to me, I would wanna make sure that they had the ability to do the work. And if that's in here, that's fine. If you feel it's covered in
I
there.
feel it's as much as it can be.
Yeah, okay.
Without, I'm not sure objectively how to incorporate that concept. I understand what you're saying, but
Yeah.
essentially if a name is provided, what you're looking for, and that there is kind of a commitment for them to pursue and follow up and give updates as necessary. I just don't know how you can put in that particular requirement. I'm not seeing how to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not to delay this, but if I were asking the PD, I would expect the PD to say, I've got an overtime budget that's gonna help us out with this, and I've got 2 men assigned to go ahead and do the necessary background checking and doing the work. Here's my commitment to you if you do this work. It's sort of a handshake here where we're both working together. But if you feel it's something that's covered in here, Brian, we won't have to worry about it.
I think if you look at the other states that are currently doing familial
Yeah.
searching, the number of names that are released are a finite number. It's not 50, 60, it's, 1, 2. I don't know any department that wouldn't have the resources to necessarily track those down. So in the UK, they might release something with 100 names. That's not how anyone in the United States is doing that. It's a very finite number of names that are being released. So at least from my perspective, and again, this is more for I get a crack at the apple next round through the commission, but from my perspective, I'm not as concerned about it.
Okay.
And I would think the mere requirement that this be a significant enough case to warrant this is partial assurance that they really want to go forward on this and will.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
It seems to me that we are progressing through this essentially one page at a time, and we're doing it collectively. Is that okay with the subcommittee, that we continue along that track and not have to go back and forth
Yeah.
between pages? We'll just address each page as we go. Okay. Dr. Bieber, you were starting page 36.
Page 36, I'll be very quick. At the very top, could we add the word convicted before offenders? Very top of page 36. Do you see that?
I think what happened is if you look at the regulation and the implementation plan, what happened is the offender definition means convicted offender.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's one of these things where offender term is used, but the definition of offender is a convicted
Fine.
person convicted of.
Fine. Then at the very bottom of page 36, and again in section 2 at the top of 37, we're saying that the commission must approve the software, and on page 37, the established validated kinship threshold. I'm going to suggest a wording change there. Do we really think that the Commission on Forensic Science is able to approve software or an established validated kinship threshold?
Well, they approve it based on your recommendation. So they have to approve, that's the process of how everything is set up, so
Okay.
that's required for them to do, but it's based on the recommendation that you make to them.
Okay. In that case, I'd like to...
I'm going to stay on page 36. I've
Yeah.
got three ands to remove. The first is under 3B1. The next is under 3C2, 1 and 2.
So you are leaving the and
After 3.
after B2,
Yes.
3B2, and C2, 3.
Yes. Anything else on page 36? Page 37?
37 at the top in 2. Allison and I were talking about this earlier. Evaluate the candidate list based on an established, we're suggesting on a validated kinship threshold value as opposed to an established threshold value.
I don't think you can validate the threshold value.
You're right. I'm a little concerned about painting the New York State Police into a corner with a particular value.
So I was gonna suggest value with an apostrophe S after it.
That's better.
Or value parentheses S.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree with you
Yeah.
on that.
So how would it read then?
Do you wanna leave established?
Yes, I don't think you
Okay.
can validate it.
Yeah, yeah.
Evaluate the candidate list based on established threshold, parens, S, parens.
Could we
Uh,
add kinship? That's what,
Established kinship threshold values.
threshold has no meaning without a modifier. What kind of threshold?
I was gonna put the S after values.
Yeah, that's where it is.
Yeah,
But I'm
okay.
asking if we could put the word kinship before
Or
the word...
calculation threshold values.
Okay. Ken?
Where is
What's kinship?
established gone?
No, I don't
I
think
lost-
so.
We're gonna keep established, I think.
You want to keep it there.
Established kinship threshold value, paren, S, close paren. Right, Amanda?
Yes. Yes, I'm,
Amanda? Is that,
Yeah, what did we, what was the term we used in the first paragraph? I would just keep it the same as that.
Indices, kinship indices.
Would that work?
kinship.
Evaluate the candidate list based
Mhm.
on
I think it,
an established kinship threshold indice.
no, kinship index threshold. I don't think we need the index here.
Okay. Either kinship calculation threshold or kinship threshold
Kinship threshold value.
with the S,
the
yeah.
S, and
Okay, evaluate the candidate list based on an established kinship threshold value, parens S.
No, the AN goes out since there is the plural here.
So just
Based on
omit it
established
altogether.
kinship threshold.
So we're keeping it-
values.
Okay,
Okay.
yep.
Read it one more time.
Evaluate the candidate list based on established kinship threshold values with a parens around the S.
Yes,
Yes.
okay.
Approved by blah, blah,
Yes.
blah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
up there in the top, the first line, should it be state DNA data bank? Sometimes you call it state DNA data bank, and sometimes it's state data bank. Is it defined as,
I think we can make that consistent throughout all
Yes.
documents.
as state DNA data bank?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Jumping down, 5.3, could we consider changing familial to biological? Or am I being
Information
too
provided.
neurotic?
I'm sorry, where?
5A3.
Page
5A3.
5A3.
Hey,
If I were editing your master's thesis, I would change it, but since I'm not,
I don't have a problem with the change.
I don't have
It's
a
more
problem with
accurate.
the change, but I'm not sure it's necessary. I realize it's, but we're talking about DNA. It's not gonna be, Aunt Susie, who's just of no relationship,
but there's enough confusion by non-DNA experts
These are
about
non-DNA
familial
people.
searching,
Yeah.
those who
Oh.
aren't students of Gregor Mendel, who might,
and
And
we
this is going
remember
to
from World
non-DNA
Trade
people.
Center,
yeah.
when the police were collecting the family, they were collecting people with no biological
Mhm. Yeah.
relationship.
And who is this report going to? So,
Right.
it's not going to a
Okay.
DNA examiner or something, so,
What do you think?
I
Ken?
like biological.
I'm
It's
just
going
thinking
to,
of
like,
wording.
investigators.
From biological in place of familial, or do we want to say familial paren biological? Or is that getting
Genetic.
too?
Or genetic?
I look to Gina or Brian to see how it impacts.
I don't foresee an impact later in the document, so I think it's really what you feel is scientifically appropriate.
So this is going in the report to investigators. So I guess whatever
Right.
you think would be most clear to them.
You know, I think taking up on Ken's point and being a person that was through that process, you know, probably the least ambiguous is biological, so that way, even though, you know, he's my brother, he's adopted, but he's my brother, I'm giving a sample. So that way, biological means, you know, that there has to be that level of connection. Not that I ever wanna endorse
think it's
his,
clear.
his thesis review hand, but it sounds like in this case it might be justified.
I'm fine with biological in that
I'm just
location.
wondering whether we want to leave familial and add biological, or just,
That's-
Familial paren,
Yeah.
i.e. biological, close paren.
That's fine.
that's
Okay.
fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's all I have. for that page.
On 37, sorry. sorry, I'm gonna remove some more ands. At the very top of the page, second line, remove the and. Under 3, remove that and. Under 5A3, remove that and. 5B, 1 and 2, remove those ands.
So wait, in 5A3, is that adding an and?
I'm sorry, I wanted to, I apologize. Let me go back
Okay.
and correct what I just said. Top of the page, second line, remove the and. Under 3, I'm gonna add an and.
And a semicolon.
Yeah.
5A3, I'm going to add an and. 5B, 1, I'm going to remove an and. 5B, 1, 2, I'm going to remove an and. Sorry for the confusion. Couldn't read my own handwriting.
Well, 5B1-3, you should remove an and too.
Yes. Same logic.
So I would,
Right.
I would
Because the-
suggest that somebody just look at it,
Okay,
be consistent.
sure.
So in case we've missed something.
Good point.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're right,
Anything else on page 37?
I had one question. So it's item 3, at the top of the page. Sufficient evidence sample exists for YSDR testing. Are there, and this probably is broader than this document, are there rules for consumption of sample? Is there any regulation in the state of Vermont to conserve sample for future testing, for defense testing? Is there?
I think different laboratories have different policies within the state about that.
Okay.
So usually if it comes down to, and again, I'm going through my history of when I was
Yeah.
on the other side of things, if we had a sample that had to be consumed, we would notify the defense. When I was with the OCME forever ago, I don't know what their current policy is, but I'm guessing it's fairly similar, and we would notify them in advance of it. Some labs have policies like that, but it's an individual lab policy.
Individual lab policy.
Yeah, and also, when we look at a document like this, it's looking historical to, the first cases where full STR profiles were being generated. So I can't speak to what those policies were then versus what they are now.
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering if there's a statewide policy to reserve some for future analysis, and if so, then we'd be violating that.
This is not in conflict with any statewide policy.
Yeah.
Anything else on page 37?
And I would interpret this, that if there's not enough evidence, left, or if they need to retain that evidence, that would not preclude them from doing, from moving forward without the YSDR.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question, just a question about 5A4. The information provided should be treated only as an investigative lead. Is it should or shall? What is if any other use than as an investigative lead, is there some penalty to it? What are the other possible uses of the profile? So, should it be should or shall?
Or must?
Or must? Shall is a must, kind
Must. Do you want to put must?
of. Must I like.
Does that, again, look
Yeah,
to.
I think the intent of that is that once someone gets that, they're not just saying, oh, this is the person, thinking that this is the correct lead. It's just an investigative lead, that's all it should be used as.
But is there a nefarious use of it, potentially?
No, I don't think there's a nefarious use of it. I think it's, it's only one piece of the puzzle. You shouldn't take it as anything definitive, it's just one piece. I think that's what that is intended to mean.
But making it stronger
It's fine.
is fine.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Shall, I think, is
Must
better
or
word.
shall
I
or-
think shall is
Okay.
better than.
Other comments on page 37? Moving on to 38.
Dr. Adams, there are two places under C, C1 and C2, where the terms established threshold are used, and we need to then correct those to the same wording we used on page 37 at the top, 2. However, we
Correct.
said it there, we need
Right.
to say it in the same way.
Agreed.
From what I've seen, that your transfer of established thresholds to the other terminology will be used consistent throughout the regulation implementation plan and the rest of the policy. Because it does, that established threshold does appear in other places in those other two
Yes.
supporting documents as well.
So then it would be threshold with an S
Correct.
at the end.
And I think it was,
Kinship
Kinship
values.
threshold
Established
values.
kinship
Kinship.
threshold values.
Yeah. That's all I have on that page.
Is there anything else on page 38? Well, let's move on then to, first would be the regulations, page 41. Yes.
You ready?
Yes, sir, Dr. Beaver.
On page 41, about the 5th line down, offender may be I would invite adding the words close biological before the word relative. And under 2AB, the last word in the sentence is kinship statistics. We either need to change that to kinship calculations or use the same terms of art we use.
I recommend we use the same word that we used in the opening paragraph of the policy.
That's all I have on that page.
Down on the very bottom, under 1, I would recommend the change of the forensic DNA profile to the evidence DNA profile.
similarly, I would say throughout the document, you should do the same.
Yes.
And I think in drafting these, that there was some interchange between them, but it's all meant the same thing, so I would advocate evidence throughout the document.
Mhm.
Agreed.
Okay, yeah, it's up here.
Anything else on 41? Moving to 42.
I got a question about capitalization. Everything is lowercase here.
That's how the format of regs, that's how they do it in the
Really?
regs, yes.
In keeping with the change, we'll change number 3 to the evidence DNA profile. We'll also remove the ands after 3.1 and 3.2. Anything else on page 42? Moving to 43. I've got one change under J. That would be, yeah, under, is it J? Doesn't make any sense, sorry.
Yeah, I
It
think it is,
does
it's
not.
J.
Is
Upon
it?
receipt.
Yes, upon receipt.
Why is it at J? Suddenly we've gone to J and
I is at the top of the page, it starts with the division.
It's the fourth line
Oh.
from the bottom of
Okay,
43?
yep, that's it. Okay. After subparagraph, it has parentheses B. That should be lowercase I, double I.
Good catch. What happened is over here, it's just referring to the wrong place in a previous part of it. That's just a
Wow.
typo, so good catch.
Very good.
Whoa, Dwight.
Way to go, man.
Stayed up all night reading this. Okay, anything else on page 43? Moving to 44. Hearing nothing, moving to 45. Dr. Beaver?
Very top line, just to be sure we're complete, established threshold that
Mhm.
needs to be modified in the same way, and then down, jumping down to, is that L? Or 1, sorry. If no candidates exceed the established threshold,
Yes.
those have to be changed. And then jumping up 2 lines in 3, that would be 2, 3, definitive statement of a familial
Biological.
paren, i.e. biological, close paren.
As well as adding an and.
Right.
And then,
Uh-huh.
and then 4, changing should to shall.
Uh-huh.
And then we have the same threshold values on the top of page 44 as well. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I missed that.
Yes.
Yep, got it.
Anything
Okay.
else with, I'm
I
sorry.
just have one. So the existing regs, so you've changed the terms to evidence DNA profile, but the existing regs do use the term forensic DNA profile. So do you want to change the existing regs to evidence DNA profile because they use the term forensic DNA index and forensic DNA profile?
I think we
So
should be
would-
consistent throughout all 3 documents.
So I guess,
Yeah.
okay, so. Alright.
So we'll make sure that the policy, the regs, and the implementation plan all
Are
use the consistent
consistent.
terminology, referring to the evidence as what the regs currently state, which is forensic evidence.
The definition is of the forensic DNA profile, which is a DNA profile that is derived from biological evidence originating from and associated with the commission of a crime.
Yeah, they'd be
So-
consistent.
So I guess we'll, if we have the leeway from you to be consistent and make it conform, so we're not changing everything in all of the regs, cause the regs are
Yes.
quite.
Right. It-
Okay.
Clearly forensic in that case is defined as evidence.
Right.
Do you want to put a parentheses after it here?
Well, if we put a parentheses, then it wouldn't correspond to this definition, because the definition is the phrase forensic DNA profile. So this is the definition.
Okay.
So, and that's how it's
If we
used
put an
throughout the
IE,
regs.
like we did with biological, I don't know, does that,
I think it makes it confusing,
okay, then let's keep it at,
so I guess we'll go through and make everything conform to whatever the definition is.
Okay.
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 Okay. Anything else on the regulations? We'll move to the implementation plan, page 47.
why don't we, add in the glossary of terms to just clarify forensic here when you define it again?
Okay.
You mean starting on page 73 where the glossary is?
73.
Page 49.
On 49. In red, 49 in red.
that glossary.
I would just put that, because we're changing the we're changing, I would just define forensic as, just put it in here.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, would anyone like to start out at page 49, 50, 51,
Page 50,
52?
page 50,
Uh-huh.
familial search. A targeted evaluation of the offender DNA profiles.
Yes.
And then the last word in the sentence, statistics. We either need to go back to the wording we were using before, or based on kinship calculations
We use indices.
or indices.
I think consistency is important,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
So
Anything
do
else?
you want it to
Oh,
be
go ahead.
based on established kinship threshold values? Which is what we have in the policy?
The policy, the first paragraph has it, where was it?
Based on kinship indices to indicate potential.
We put candidate profiles. Based on
Candidate
kinship
profile, yes.
indices.
Right.
And then on page 37, we evaluate the candidate list based on an established kinship threshold
Yeah.
value. So,
Yeah, that would be good.
so which,
Do it that way.
So how about for this definition, on page 50, we lift out the sentence on page 1 of the policy? We replace it, so it would be familial searching is a targeted evaluation of the offender DNA profiles in the New York State DNA Data Bank, which generate a list of candidate profiles based on kinship indices to indicate potential biologically related individuals to one or more sources of evidence.
yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Nice.
Anything else on 50? Hearing nothing, moving on to 51. (52) Nothing, we'll move on to 53. How about 54? (55) I've got two to recommend for 55. And this is showing the distinction between the state and the locals and allowing the local labs that perform EMR and EKR. So, the page 55, after the second full paragraph, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Change 3 to 4, change 4 to 5, because I'm going to insert a 3. That will allow for the local laboratories that do EMR and EKR.
What Dwight is talking about is, if you recall, we just did the reg change for partial match, and that was to allow, based on the validation of CODA 7, that now all the local labs could do that calculation. And actually, he's pointing out now, quite aptly, that the way this implementation plan, it's not consistent with the reg change we just went through, so it's just making that change. So this means that the local laboratory can do that statistical calculation using CODA 7.
What exactly is being added? Can we hear it?
It's rather lengthy, but I'll be glad to read it. I don't know.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, number 3, we'll read now. The expected match ratio, parentheses, EMR, close, and or, /or, the expected kinship ratio, paren, EKR, close paren, for the 4 major ethnic groups in the FBI allele frequency databases, paren, or equivalent likelihood ratio approved by the state DNA subcommittee, close paren, was calculated by it, and at least one of the 4 database values for EMR or EKR is greater than or equal to 1.0, and all the others are greater than or equal to 0.1, paren, or an equivalent predetermined statistical measure approved by the DNA subcommittee, close paren, period. If available and appropriate, parenthesis, comma, additional DNA analyses, paren, e.g. YSTR mitochondrial, close paren, should be performed.
That makes it consistent with the existing reg change that just went through. Basically, translating that is that it essentially means the local laboratory can perform that calculation as long as it meets those statistical thresholds for EMR or EKR.
So they have to do that. I'm a little bit confused on this. They have to do that.
Previously, the state police would be doing all those calculations because they had the software and no one else did. Now, with CODA 7, everyone has access to the same validated software. So what this does is it allows the local laboratory to perform that calculation in advance. So it's essentially, this is just memorializing a process map change. So before the process was, the local laboratory would submit it to the state police would then do the calculation and say if it met threshold. Now, prior to submitting it, the local laboratory will do that to make sure it meets threshold.
Okay.
And that's consistent with the regs that the reg changes that you just passed at the November 5th meeting.
So they have to do those calculations first
Correct.
before the familial searching?
This is partial match.
This has nothing
Sorry,
to do with
This
it.
has
sorry,
nothing to
sorry,
do with
sorry,
it.
okay.
It's just a corresponding change to the regs that you approved.
Okay,
That was the
okay,
confusing
okay,
thing.
okay.
I don't think anybody said, yeah.
Okay.
That- Yeah, so that section doesn't have to do with familial.
Okay.
I've got one other significant change at the bottom, number 3. I want to replace all of that paragraph.
Now,
And it-
this is the one renumbered as 4.
No, sir,
No,
I'm
two,
sorry.
under
The
2.
very bottom of the page, the Arabic number 3. Remove that entire paragraph. And again, this goes back to the local state issue. Replace it with the following. Partial match request from a local CODIS laboratory that satisfies all criteria described above will be submitted to the state CODIS laboratory for verification, period. Upon receipt of such verification, comma, the division will release the name of the offender to the local CODIS laboratory, period. If the criteria are not satisfied, comma, the state CODIS laboratory will notify the division and the convicted offender, I think its profile, will not be released. I can't read my own writing.
So basically, that's just again memorializing the idea that the local lab will do this, the state police will confirm it, so they'll also do it. And then if it meets the threshold, it'll get released, and if it doesn't, it won't. I was just listening to what you're saying. I wasn't scribing as much, I was relying on others in the audio to scribe for me.
Yes.
But that makes sense to me. And clarifying, this isn't to do with familial, this is just making the implementation plan consistent
Conform.
with the reg change for partial that went through before.
Any other comments on page 55? 56? Dr. Bieber?
In the highlighted section, halfway through, again, this echoes changes we've made before. Familial searching is a targeted evaluation of the offender DNA profiles in the DNA data bank. So I'm,
Sure.
strike the S on
Yep.
offenders, and that, okay, add DNA profiles. Next sentence, based on kinship calculations, are we gonna revert back to what we've said previously when it generates a list of candidates based on kinship calculations, or are we gonna go back to
We had
the wording we've used a number of times
Indices.
before?
Indices.
Kinship indices,
Yes.
okay. Thank you. And then down below, in the paragraph that is highlighted that begins with the words "upon receipt of an MOU," jumping down to the middle of the paragraph, New York State DNA Subcommittee and the Commission, excuse me, the FIC must evaluate the candidate list based on an established kinship threshold value. This, we need
That's the
to,
one that
we need to do something with that.
didn't we put in
Yeah, established kinship threshold values.
with the parentheses?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. And then, in the very last paragraph, the same thing. If there are candidates that exceed the established kinship threshold values, do you see
Mhm.
that?
Anything else on 56? 57?
Same thing in the first full paragraph. If no candidates on the list exceed the established
Kinship.
kinship threshold values.
Mhm.
Yes. Other comments on 57? 58?
Oh, wait 1 second. On 57, the top paragraph will also indicate the information provided is not a definitive statement of a familial relationship and shall be treated only as an investigative lead.
Okay.
Yes.
Good catch. Page 58. Hearing nothing, moving on to 59. '60. '61. '62. 63.
On 63, we're limiting this to STR.
Yeah.
I was about to raise that. Clearly, at the moment, that's what will be used. Do we want to leave it open, especially when we come down the required CODIS loci? That, I don't know, is that likely to change? There may
It still has the 13.
It's certainly going to change in the very near future.
Right.
and will be increased. Do we address it now, or do we address it?
What I'm wondering is for now, for familial, let's look at this with the eye of familial. I think the other partial match change that we made was important, but I think let's revisit this again
Sure.
In a couple of meetings to bring the whole thing up to date, because as you're pointing out, it's really changing.
Sure.
And this is from 1994, I believe, which the first version of this is, 1997. So I think clearly I think we can undertake a whole overhaul of this document.
Okay.
But just to follow up on Ken's point, Brian, this doesn't prevent the New York State Police from using Identifiler or Global Filer once they have enough profiles that are typed with those markers, does it?
I don't believe so.
Shall include, not limited, right?
It has to include those
Yeah.
13.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not limited to.
But it's not limited,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
Okay, that's a good approach,
Okay.
Brian. Thank you. Page 64. Page 65. '66. '67 or '68.
I have a question for Brian about weekly. Shall be conducted at least weekly. I think most labs do it weekly, but why are you forcing them to do it weekly?
I think it's just being consistent with what the FBI is doing. They're actually trying to move to daily. But if that's a concern, we can definitely give more latitude.
Was it monthly before?
I believe it was
Yes.
monthly.
So you wanna just leave it
Four.
monthly?
Yeah.
So if you want, we
I
can
would
leave-
worry that by putting shall in here,
Yeah.
you might force non-compliance for reasons
It
that
was
are not
monthly.
under control of the New York State Police.
On page 91.
91 is monthly?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could just
I
leave it
think
at
they
monthly.
I think they should do it weekly, but I don't like the word shall there.
Okay, well, we'll say shall monthly. And obviously, they'll do more than that, but we can revise accordingly. So essentially, that will remain unchanged from the previous one.
Any other comments?
I mean, I think that can be looked at too,
Yeah.
when we,
Right.
in the next revision.
Which will be soon.
Yeah.
The last document then is,
It's actually the same. What happened is, with this one, I thought it would be easier to put the document twice and then highlight where the changes were.
Oh.
So you've actually gone through the policy, the regs, and the implementation plan at this point.
I
So
thought there was a redundancy there, but I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Commissioner Green, I just want to welcome you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank all the subcommittee members for the work that went into these revisions and the drafting of the policy. A very thoughtful discussion today, and thank you for the effort, the work, considering all of this and developing the policy that's before us. Before we move on, is there any other comment from anyone related to draft policy or changes in the other two documents?
I am unsure exactly what happens next.
I believe next we will put this to a vote in recommending to the commission that we recommend that
And
they
will be
approve or.
after we get a copy with all of the changes incorporated.
Well, you could vote on all of the changes that we've made today, and then we'd ship them out to you, and you can review them. And then if there's anything that's an issue, then we would have to come back to you. If there's not, if everything that we've discussed today is incorporated, then that motion would carry forward to the commission. So it's
Okay,
only if there's a problem.
That was the question.
Okay.
Yeah, works for me.
So what should we do?
I would like to make a motion that the DNA subcommittee make a recommendation to the Commission on Forensic Science that New York State adopt the familial searching policy draft as we've amended it today, as well as the regulations and the implementation plan that have been similarly revised to reflect the changes in the policy that we've discussed. Do I have a second?
A second.
Dr. Eastman, second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, moving on in the agenda. The next item on the agenda is the accreditation updates. First up is Erie County Department of Central Police Services. This is regarding a notification, the change of top management. Documents are in your binder. Members of that laboratory are available by telephone if we have any questions. No vote is required. It's informational purposes only. Moving on, next is for Nassau County Medical Examiner Division of Forensic Services. The same applies. No vote is required. Members of that lab are available if you have any questions.
I had just
Dr. Buell?
just a quick question that if it were in my lab, I'd raise this quick question. It's nothing critical.
What page are you on, Eric?
I'm on page 23. And I guess it deals with evidence that's not sealed, left in a place that was not originally meant for evidence to be placed in a not sealed area, I guess. Is that correct?
Would you identify yourself and then?
Hi, I'm Karen Dilling. I'm the Assistant Director of the Nassau County Crime Lab. So in this instance, sort of more was a product of, we're adding these disciplines in the space that we have. The manual stated that we were supposed to, this is in latent prints only, that we were supposed to keep the evidence that was in progress where they were examining the evidence. They were also keeping it in the evidence accessioning area, which it does have limited access. So both areas are limited in access, and then if it needed a temporary seal, you know, because they felt that there was the risk of some sort of deleterious change, they would put a temporary seal on. But it really more was a product of just the way that the manual read at the present time, with us just brand new and starting processing.
Yeah, I guess my consideration for you just to ponder is it changes in the manual examination areas to the laboratory area. The laboratory area to me is perhaps overly broad, and that perhaps it could be more confined to something else like an examination area. For me, a laboratory area could be most anywhere.
Could be
So
the
I-
atrium, could be the cafeteria.
So it was, it's not critical in my mind. Well, if it were my lab, I'd define it a little bit more. Laboratory area It just seemed overly broad to me. And I just wanted to throw that out to you.
And I think with the limited space constraints and areas that we have right now,
Mhm.
we're in the new facility.
Yeah.
And we like to try and keep one definition that encompasses all the disciplines.
Yeah.
Laboratory areas are all secured and limited access areas.
Can you just say secured laboratory area?
For all our lab areas, we wouldn't consider a cafeteria a lab area. Every lab area we have is limited and secured access as part of our quality management.
So-
But even the offices, but nobody would keep evidence in offices. They're in designated places. So right now, they're either in the examination areas or they're in the accessioning area, and now an area that is indicated in here that's for that specific purpose.
Yeah.
But we need to keep the language a little bit broader because of the facilities
Mhm.
that we currently have.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're handling it. It just, for me, as an outsider, not knowing your facility, it seemed overly broad, and if you have multiple disciplines, I don't know how you treat fingerprint evidence separate and aside from somebody doing drug evidence, if those could be in the same area because they're all in the same laboratory. It's just some thoughts I had, and it sounds like you're dealing with it the best you can with your facility.
And the drug evidence is obviously a little bit more stringent. because of
Right.
the nature of the evidence.
Yeah. So, but, I mean, drug evidence wouldn't be just handled, placed in the laboratory area, right? I mean, that would be more defined.
Yeah, the drug
Yeah.
evidence is more defined, but in any laboratory, the drug evidence comes in and it's in a secured access area, but it is in an evidence area.
Right.
And in many laboratories, other lab staff have access to that evidence area.
Yeah. It sounds like you've got it to work in your facility. I'll let it go. I just wanted to bring it up. It's the way I am, sorry.
Anything else with regard to Nassau County? Next item involves the OCME Department of Forensic Biology. This involves the expanded surveillance they underwent, no votes required. Documents are in your binder for information only. Hearing nothing, we'll move on to old business. This will be Part B. We'll have a partial match update from Brian.
Sure. So, to date, in the partial match program, there's been 91 names that have been requested. Of those 91 names, evaluation could not confirm in 43, which means it didn't meet the EMR AKR. 48 names have been released. 46 cases are closed. 2 remain active. There's 3 situations, and this pretty much remains unchanged for the last several meetings, where a relative was identified In 2 of those cases, it resulted in arrest, 1 in conviction, and the other is actually in trial right now.
What type of cases were they?
The first one was a breaking into a vehicle. I don't know the exact charge, I can't remember off the top of my head, but someone had forced their way into a vehicle, they cut themselves, they dripped some blood on the center console within the car. The law enforcement agency collected that blood, and from the blood that was in the car, they were able to identify the relative. The second case, the one that's at trial right now, are 2 separate homicide cases that are being looked at, sexual assault homicide cases that were from actually the early 90s.
Other questions for Brian? Moving on to item number 6, laboratory disclosures.
May I?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, go back. Would these have shown up with familial searching as we have currently defined it?
I'm not sure for the first case. Well, I can say actually, in the case, the double murder case, my guess is no, because there's no champion. In order for familial search to be triggered, an investigator has to be pushing a case forward, bringing evidence, going through all these barriers. Partial match is always running in the background. So this particular case, no one was looking at it, it just showed up. You know, if you look at that analogy again about the tide, you know, familial search is, you know, putting on the wetsuit and going out there with the spear gun to find the fish. Partial match is walking down the beach and it just kind of jumps up in front of you. So in this particular case, that partial match from the double homicide case, I believe would not have, because to my knowledge, no one was investigating it. Regarding the other case with the vehicle break-in, I don't know if that individual would have resulted from a familial search or not. I don't know.
Anything else? Move on to item number 6, laboratory disclosures. You've been provided documents from laboratory disclosures related to Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester County laboratories. Members of those laboratories are available if you have any questions or concerns. No votes required. This is for informational purposes only. Dr. Buell?
It's more of a thought sort of question. I'm sorry. Is Karen still here? Yeah. I mean, it's just, this shows I've been out of the lab a bit, Karen. Okay, the normalization, and just curious what, this is a standard in the field where normalization is not used.
It's generally not used, but
Yeah.
it's a laboratory's choice.
Yeah, I just wondering the thought process here, just the pluses and minuses of doing it, not doing it. I just wanted to ask an expert on that. I mean, since it did cause some problems here, when would you?
I don't know if I'm
96.
an expert
Seven.
on the normalization process.
Yeah.
You know, what I can tell you from what happened here is generally based on the normalization, the peaks may be higher or lower, and the general trend was that we saw that the peaks were lower. There were less alleles
Right.
above
Yeah.
threshold.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lab's individual choice, and I think most labs choose not to because they don't want anything else.
I don't know of any
I guess
labs who
it could be
use it.
considered as
Yeah.
manipulating the data, or, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a pain in the neck checkbox, that the default is to have the box checked unless they changed that I haven't looked to see if they changed that in the newest version of GMAP
Yeah,
or IDX.
yeah.
Right, we had Life Tech in for our teach back, and we had mentioned it, and they did say that this has even happened in their own facility,
Yes,
or somebody
it has.
has
Yeah.
accidentally
Yeah.
had the normalization on, but now we have the instruments, so they will not collect the normalization, so even if that box is checked, the data hasn't been collected in that fashion.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions related to these disclosures? Hearing none, we have no items to consider during the executive session. The next meeting of the DNA Subcommittee will be May 19th, 2017, here in New York City. At this point, can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
If I could, just before you adjourn.
Commissioner Green.
I know a lot of the subcommittee members rearranged their schedules for the public hearing, and a lot of you have spent time preparing for this meeting, on your own with Brian. And just wanted to let everyone know how much I appreciate the time and effort that everyone has put in, both generally to your work on the subcommittee and specifically with regard to the familial searching. So thank you, much appreciated.
Thank you, Commissioner Green.
I'm sorry, I did have one question on the contaminated trays.
Oh, yeah.
Which,
What page are you on, Eric?
I'm on page 99. It just seemed like
Is this Suffolk County?
Suffolk County, is Suffolk County there?
We can give them a call. Check 9 first. One more number to try.
Good thing we don't have a rush sale.
So we have consistency in our response.
Okay. It's not a critical nature. Perhaps I'm overturning rocks that don't need to be overturned, but it just struck me that one of the samples, one of the racks, had a contamination on it that was from 115 days prior to the use, and I just wanted somebody to talk to me about it and go over that.
Do you think it would be good to have them come in at the next meeting?
It's the other thing that maybe so. The other thing is I wasn't quite sure if after all the cleaning, if they swabbed it, the plate, analyzed it, and then put the plate into the queue, because it's just a little confusing. Handwritten notes there on what was done. So
We will put this on old business.
Yeah.
For our next
That's-
meeting, have them
Yeah,
present.
I think what we can do is, I will draw attention to this issue, we'll have them here directly to respond,
yeah,
and I think that'll be the best way.
yeah, that sounds it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
And would you want to see the profiles?
I don't know. If somebody else does, it just disturbs me that that length of time it took place, and then maybe if they bring in a plate and say, hey, this is what we're finding. There's in this cranny over here is an issue or something. It's just
They should come prepared to
Yeah.
address
Yeah.
these concerns.
yeah.
I think,
And there's a little discrepancy here. They have the option of UV over here, but they don't state that over here in their correction. And
It seems like they have gone a step up and up, and for an educational standpoint, for us and for other folks too, it might be useful.
it might be helpful if they could just provide some information before the meeting on this.
Yeah, if,
Yeah.
you know better than I, certainly, what you would like to see, if you can somehow see that that is forwarded to them.
Oh.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, there's one more item that was just given to us
It's the Westchester County.
in the last minutes before the meeting started, page 106 through 109. We haven't had time to read this and prepare.
Okay, we'll take that time right now.
Okay. Brian, do you want to give us a summary, or is someone here to explain?
I actually have the lab director and the biological science supervisor here. If you want, they can provide you an update. You just identify yourselves.
Hi, Robert Adamo, I'm the director of the Division of Forensic Science in Westchester County.
Elaine Schwartz, the technical leader of the biology section.
So in late February, one of our DNA analysts testified on his case. Several days later, while going through some paperwork on his desk, he realized that there were samples that he had not prepared a report for. He immediately self-reported the supervisor reported to me. We called up the district attorney's office and told them. They then contacted the court. The court then contacted the defense attorney, and we actually spoke to the defense attorney that day. So during the course of the investigation, what happened was the analyst had finished their work, prepared a report, and prepared a disclosure package for the assistant district attorney. The ADA got the report and then decided he wanted additional samples sent to the laboratory. So those samples came into the laboratory. We checked our LIMS communication section of the lab. We could not find any indication that they had spoken to us. Samples went into the queue. They were being analyzed. The analyst then had a pretrial conference with the DA. The DA never brought up these samples, these additional samples. So the analyst ends up going to court thinking he has a completed case jacket when he really doesn't. So in the course of the investigation, we realized there were some areas that we needed to kind of firm up to make sure that that would never happen again. And I'll let Elaine discuss some of the things we're going to do.
We established a checklist that is required to be filled out whenever the analysts either make up a disclosure packet or go for a pretrial conference. And the things that are on the checklist are things that they can find right in the laboratory management system under that particular case. For example, if there's any open assignments still in the case, they can also, they can see that. They can also do a query in the BEAST that prints out all the samples that were run in that case. And then they have to make sure that every sample that's listed is included in one of their reports. And the third thing is they have to review all the receipts associated with that case and make sure all the items that are submitted are present on the reports that they're copying.
Had the jury begun deliberations at the time this was recognized?
Yes. Yeah.
So did the court declare a mistrial?
Yeah.
I see.
So it's scheduled, I think, sometime in April.
Has this ever happened before?
No. And pretty much everything we put into place will pretty much prevent it from ever happening again. We did a thorough investigation to find any place we could find a hole in how we were correcting this, and we really can't. We think this, there's no 100% certainty, but pretty much 99.9% certainty that this can't happen again, given that the level of checks that would be in place.
Help me understand, how did he discover this?
He had paperwork on his desk. You want to explain how they get their paperwork?
Yeah, he had DNA results that were on his desk that were separate from his case jacket. His original case jacket, after he made the Rosario packet, he filed it in the record storage room. And then when he got this new submission, he didn't realize that it was part of the first submission. So we had this, he was going through his DNA worksheets, his electropherograms, from a number of cases, and then he realized this is the case I just testified on. So the paperwork was not with the original case jacket.
Because it had been filed, because the disclosure package had already been sent.
And how, I'm just curious, how would the results of the new information that was not presented at the first trial, would they,
Would they have been
were
exculpatory?
they consistent with the previous results he reported, or?
Yes, in fact, we took one of the samples, we put it to CODIS, it actually hit against the defendant, so it's not exculpatory.
Other questions for Westchester County?
So this is not something for which you fault the examiner?
There's fault to go everywhere. There's fault with the system, that it didn't have enough things in place to catch it. Certainly, we couldn't find a case communication between in our LIM system between the DA and our analyst. So it might have been that he didn't put it in, or that this was just a phone conversation, it wasn't recorded properly. But also, and this is not to pass blame around, but when the analyst had the pretrial conference with the district attorney, those samples were never brought up. So our analyst is going into testifying with what they think is a complete case jacket. And he was very upset. He's a very good analyst. This is, it bothered him a lot. It's been bothering him, that there was a mistrial because of this case. But he's not a sloppy person. He's really not.
These things happen in busy labs with hundreds of phone calls coming in and out, whether it's a clinical lab or a forensic lab. Do you discuss these things as a group so that others can learn from hiccups that happen, so that it's not cloistered in a quiet way?
Well, they're brought up routinely at the individual staff conferences. I know Lane either has or is going to bring this up.
Yeah, we have weekly biology meetings, and this has been discussed at every meeting since it's happened.
So it's not a blame and shame thing, but a chance for everyone to.
learning
No,
experience.
it's-
A learning experience.
Right,
yeah.
I mean, basically, it's one of the things that if you don't have your paperwork organized, that it can happen to anybody. So we
Yeah.
also created something, the checklist is kind of for the back end, before we go to trial or when we make a disclosure package, but we also created something on the front end. One of the analysts that works in my section is now a case manager, and she assigns all the cases. So she is going to, from now on, she gets the receipt and the pre-log when the evidence comes in. She's gonna actually create the case jacket for the analyst. So at that time, she'll be able to tell right away, is this a new submission? If it's a new submission, she's gonna write on the outside of the folder, this is new. If she finds that it's a second or a third submission on a case, she's gonna find the original case jacket and put the new receipt in the case jacket, and then make a note on the case jacket that this is a second submission, so that the analyst would be aware of it right away. Because normally what's been happening is, a case comes in, we get the receipt and the pre-log, and it sits on the analyst's desk, so that way a case jacket is made up immediately, and that all the paperwork for that case will keep going into that case jacket.
That way, if we had a case where, say, a disclosure package had been prepared and the person filed, like, it would get pulled back out of the filing cabinet and put back on the thing. The history of the laboratory is that we don't take the original documents to court, we take copies. So he felt he was taking the actual prepared case jacket that was complete, and it wasn't complete.
Thank you very much.
But I think you bring up a good point, that do all the lab directors talk to each other? So, or do all the DNA, I should probably say, the DNA technical leaders talk to each other? So when something obscure like this happens, that the other labs can learn from that as well, I think would be very helpful,
We
you know.
have we have three platforms that meet to interrupt for doing that. There's a biology technical working group that meets twice a year.
Okay.
Discusses things like this. There's a quality assurance technical working group, meets twice a year. And the Crime Laboratory Directors Association meets twice a year. And these things come up on all those three platforms.
Good.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
As I mentioned, we have nothing to discuss in executive session. Our next meeting is May 19th, 2017, here in New York City. At this point, could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you very much.